This video will be my long-term and final review of the 2019 Giant Revolt Advanced Zero. Now, even though I'm reviewing the 2019, this video will totally apply to the 2020 model because really nothing has changed except for the color, and they are now using Maxxis tires instead of the Giant House brand tires. All of the other components are exactly the same. So I've been using this bike for a year now, and in this video I will just kind of talk about things long-term. How has it held up? What are the things I like? What are the things that I don't like? I've made other reviews on this bike, which I'll link below if you want to go watch those, because I'm going to try not to rehash things that I've said in that video. Again, this will be just focusing on the long-term performance. A lot of people on my channel ask me about the difference between a cross and a gravel bike, and I did make a video about that subject. I'll link that one below as well. But the first thing that I want to mention on this bike is when I go from my cyclocross race bike, which is a Giant TCX, to this bike, that's when I really notice the ride characteristics of this bike. The Revolt feels really planted, really solid on higher speed type situations. It feels smooth, whereas the cross bike just feels really snappy and agile. It's not quite as stable. And this bike, you know, it's just designed for those long gravel rides where you don't know what type of terrain you're going to encounter. You may be on some trails, you may be on smooth roads, you may be on a fast, loose gravel descent. That's where the versatility of the gravel bike really comes in. At the end of the video, I'll talk about who I think would benefit from a gravel bike like this one versus a cyclocross bike. The only component that I've changed out on the bike is the saddle. So the Giant saddle that came on here was okay after a couple hours. It was a little uncomfortable for me. Like I've said in a lot of my videos, saddles are very personal. So this is the one that works well for me. This is the WTB Silverado, which I've run for many years, and I have it on several of my bikes. The accessories that I put on this bike are, of course, some water bottle cages. So this bike, you can run 2 water bottle cages. This bike does come with the ability to add a 3rd water bottle cage. I don't think I've mentioned that in the other reviews I've done of this bike, but you can take out these little plugs and put in another water bottle cage. And I really like this down tube protector that Giant puts on, by the way. Other accessories I've added is, of course, a pump, which is really important to carry. And then I have my Garmin out front mount, and then a mirror. And typically I'll put a seat pack underneath the seat that will carry tubes and tire levers and things like that. So like I said, since this is a long-term review, let's talk about how some of the components and things have done over the long-term use of this bike for a year. So I want to get the negative out of the way first. And really there's only one negative, and it's going to depend on your perspective whether this is a negative, and that's the wheels. So the first thing is the valve stems. Fortunately, that's a really quick change. This one I've left. The front one I replaced with a Stan's valve stem, because the Giant valve stems, and I've used these on several other bikes from Giant, and they're just not good quality. They get really hard to turn, really hard to open up the Presta valve to put air in it. You know, sometimes I even have to use needle nose pliers to get those things to turn. So the Stan's valve stems are just much higher quality. So if you pick up one of these bikes, I would recommend just go ahead and get some Stan's valve stems, put them in right away. It'll save you a lot of hassle. The other negative about the wheels is the fact that it's so hard to unseat these beads. It's the exact same wheel set that I have on the Giant TCX, which is the Advanced Pro 1 or 0, I can't remember. But it's so hard to unseat these tire beads. You can use a flat blade screwdriver, but that's not the best option because you can damage the rim. It's just a kind of a cosmetic thing. So what you have to do is literally like deflate the tire, stand on it, and pull up on the spokes to get it to unseat. It should not be that difficult. So that's a negative to me, because if you're in it, let's say you're in a gravel race and you get a flat, you know, your Stan's sealant or whatever sealant you use didn't do the job, and you've got to put in a tube real quickly. Well, if you're just trying to push on this thing, and every once in a while you can unseat it with your fingers, but like with a Stan's wheel, for example, you can just, you know, deflate the tire, push, and it'll unseat and you're good to go. You can almost take the tire off without any tire levers. But with this one, it's so hard to unseat. It's something that Giant needs to remedy, and maybe they have. And also there are times I just want to add sealant quickly before a ride. Maybe it's been a few months and I've got a big ride coming up. I just want to open up the tire real quick, add the sealant, and it's just much more difficult to do that with these rims. The final negative on the wheel set is just the fact that they are carbon. Now that may be a positive for you or maybe a negative. For me, I'm kind of neutral about it, but I like running carbon wheels on all of my bikes except gravel. And I like a wheel set that's going to be pretty comfortable, pretty compliant. The nice thing about the carbon is they do accelerate well, they're light, they're fast, especially if you're riding in the mountains and you get out of the saddle and climb. They're just gonna do a really good job at putting power directly to the wheels. However, they are a little bit more harsh than an alloy wheel. Personally, I would just put on a pair of Stan's Grail wheels and be totally happy. Like I said, it's gonna depend on your perspective, whether that's a negative or not. But I do like the ride quality as far as the speed, so it's a trade-off. That's the only real negative about this bike. Everything else has been extremely positive. So before I talk about the frame and the ride quality, let me just talk about how the components have done. I really like the component spec on this bike, Shimano Ultegra, and it's got the RX, so Ultegra RX, which has a clutch, more designed for gravel use than for, you know, like a pure road bike. And these components have held up really well. Smooth operating front derailleur, rear derailleur. I've had literally no maintenance issues with this bike over a year. I totally prefer Shimano road brakes over SRAM road brakes. Now I do like SRAM for mountain. I like SRAM shifting for mountain. I like the SRAM brakes, but for road bikes, these Shimano brakes, I've had to do, I don't think I've done any brake centering, any maintenance at all. They've worked flawlessly. The problem with the SRAM, and I don't know if it's the rotors are just imperfect, like they have a little bit of wobble, or the pad tolerance is not very good. It's a tighter pad tolerance. These Shimano Ultegra brakes have had no issues as far as maintenance, so the components have done great. Now it's got this Praxis crankset, but for me, I'd rather have a Shimano Ultegra crankset for the simple reason that I want to put a Stages power meter on the bike. I like having a power meter on a gravel bike. It's probably the one bike that I really want a power meter on, and I can't do that with the Praxis. I know there is a power meter made for these, but I'm just partial to Stages. I love the simplicity, I love the value. So if you don't need a power meter, these Praxis cranks will do fine for you. Like I said, they've performed really well, no problems with shifting. I don't think I've dropped a chain on this bike. I don't think I've even had a misshift. I mean, Shimano Ultegra is just great. I know they're coming out with their new GRX series, but I can't see it working better than this. Like I said, no issues at all, super smooth shifting. I want to throw in something here because I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of people deciding on a gravel bike. And I've said this in other videos of gravel bikes, but I totally prefer a 2x system on a gravel bike versus a 1x. Now there may be people out there that prefer a 1x. I like the fact that the cassette on a 2x system can be tighter, so you don't have that jump between gears, especially if you're riding in flatter terrain and you may be trying to hold a constant gear so your speed is not varying too much. You want to be able to shift and have minor changes in the gearing as opposed to a big jump. So bikes that have a 1x system have to have a cog in the back that has a bigger spread, and like I said, that just causes you to jump between gears more. A few other components I want to mention is the defuse handlebars and the defuse seat post. And what that is kind of Giant's way of just adding some compliance. So it's not a totally round seat post, so the seat post can flex a little bit over bumps, and I can say it works. Same with the handlebars, they have a little bit of flex, and I've mentioned this in another video, but it's worth mentioning again. I love the shape of these handlebars. So they have a little bit of a flare to them at the bottom. It's not dramatic. I like the way the hoods are. I like the fact that the hoods are not really angled in with some bars that have a lot of flare to them. And so I like my hand position on these bars because I ride mostly in the hoods. I don't ride in the drops very often. My hands are up here and I love the positioning. Like I said, the only thing that they've changed for the 2020 models is the fact that they use Maxxis tires instead of these crosscut tires. These tires roll well, they're comfortable, they have some really good compliance. They feel to me like they're a little bit heavier than some of my other favorite gravel tires, which would be the Schwalbe G1s and also the Maxxis Ramblers. But as far as ride quality, they're good. And wear, I mean, like I said, I've been riding this bike quite a bit for a year, and they still have a decent amount of tread on them. And finally, long-term report for the frame is excellent. To me, it's a perfect geometry for gravel riding. This bike handles well. So I've ridden some bikes that have felt a little floppy. This bike has some pretty good steering precision, keeping the bike stable, and that's important, especially if you're going 35 miles an hour over loose gravel. You need a bike that's stable, and this bike is very stable. It's also very comfortable. So it's got these flatter seat stays, which gives some compliance, and also the fact that the top tube's a little flatter just allows the bike to be more compliant. So like I said, when I'm on my Giant TCX, that bike, the frame is stiffer and it feels nice when you're accelerating, in a cross race or on a smoother gravel road and you just want that snappy bike. But I really appreciate this bike, especially when you get into the 3, 4, 5 hour range of riding and you want a bike that just is comfortable. I think it balances the ride quality between agile and also comfortable really well. Overall, I've really enjoyed the Giant Revolt for the past year that I've been riding it. It's a bike that I can fully recommend. I think it's a great value, $3,400 around there. I don't know exactly what they priced it for 2020, but you get a lot of bike for the money. Carbon frame, carbon wheels, Shimano Ultegra components. This is a bike that, honestly, other than the saddle, there's nothing else that I would change out on it. You can pick it up and go hit the roads. I think it's going to suit the weekend rider who just wants a really high-end, nice, comfortable gravel bike that they can take out for 3, 4, 5 hours, all the way up to the person who's racing gravel. This is a bike that is very fast. Even though it's comfortable, it's also fast, which is exactly what you want in a gravel race bike. It's a bike that is, like I said, it's just really well equipped. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I was going to talk about who would want a gravel bike over a cyclocross bike. I would recommend a gravel bike, especially one like this, to anyone other than the pure cyclocross racer, or if you want a very fast and agile gravel bike and you ride smooth roads. You can race a gravel bike in a cyclocross race if you're not highly competitive. But if you are, you're going to want a bike that's going to corner super quickly and a bike that accelerates really quickly, and that is a cyclocross race bike. Like I said, the only other person that I would recommend a cross bike over a gravel bike is maybe you're a roadie, maybe you're just used to those super light, fast, agile type bikes, and the gravel roads that you ride are not that rough and you don't need the gear range that you get on a gravel bike. Then I would recommend a cyclocross race bike. Everyone else, I think you'd be happier on a gravel bike. The final thing that I'll mention is my next gravel bike that I'll be testing is the new Niner RLT9. So if you're interested in that, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Any questions or comments that you have, go ahead and drop those below. If you've used the Giant Revolt, I'd love to know your thoughts. Leave those in the comments as well. Thanks for watching.